you could wind up in an orange jumpsuit. It's not fashionable, okay? It is against a federal law to use a product, even if it's manufactured by an FDA-registered site, but to use the product in a way that has not been approved by the FDA. They call that an adulterated and misbranded product.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of BIOS K.O.L sessions. As physicians, we all have great ideas, but turning those into products or businesses can be quite difficult. But today, we're hopefully going to give you all the answers. I have the CEO and founder of Bruder Consulting and Venture Group. He's helped hundreds of physicians and businesses go from idea to product. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Alberto. Happy to be here. Hopefully, we'll cover some important topics and give people some kernels along the way to be successful.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about your background. I think what some people don't know is that you were an orthopedic surgeon and then turned into this consulting group. How was that transition, and how has that helped shape your business now?
Well, thank you for giving me the chance to actually clarify all of that.
Okay.
In fact, I'm not an orthopedic surgeon by training. I am a physician scientist. I did my PhD with Arnold Kaplan back in the 1980s and contributed to the identification of MSCs.
Yeah.
I then went in to do an oculoplastic residency for facial reconstruction and decided to leave clinical practice and join industry. And I joined industry as the second employee of Osiris Therapeutics.
Sure.
And that's now over 30 years ago. So I've been in industry the entire professional career with startup, mid-cap, large-cap Johnson & Johnson, Becton Dickinson, and my last role was as the Chief Medical and Scientific Officer for all of Stryker Corporation. So I've been in the orthopedic industry my entire life.
And that's why we all think you're an orthopedic surgeon.
That's why you might think that. That makes sense. And we've talked about this. I am not an attorney. So all the things that we'll talk about today and when I come to these meetings, they're not legally binding counsel advice.
That's right. So tell us a little bit about, how your business came about and what is the process like? For instance, if a physician does have an idea on a new product or technology, what's the very first step they should take?
So it's a great question. We have helped two people coming out of a university and companies like Medtronic and Johnson & Johnson. We help them navigate the journey from concept all the way through commercialization. And they come to us at different stages throughout that process. Physicians or scientists or physician scientists who want to develop a product need to think about a couple of things first. One is you want to find yourself coming up with a solution for an unmet need. That means you want to be a solution as opposed to a technical technical approach that's looking for a problem to solve.
Got it.
So think about the end at the beginning. What is it that you're trying to solve? And when you think about how you navigate that, one of the first things that you should do is not tell anybody about your idea. Don't tell them about your idea until you've at least created some kind of intellectual property filing, and typically you would need an attorney for that. It's called an invention disclosure. And when you have an invention disclosure, for example, you would never go talk to a company and tell them you have a great idea for a product without having the protection of at least an invention disclosure and a patent filing, a confidentiality agreement, because we all know sadly too many cases where individual physicians have been scooped by companies who said that's a great idea and they just ran with it.
So would that be kind of the biggest rookie mistake you see people make is doing that when they try to make the jump?
Yeah, I think you have to really protect yourself. The other thing that is really important is to decide whether or not you want to be a surgeon or you want to be a non-op physician or you want to be an operator in building a business. Because I can tell you that when I started, I thought I would be, back in the day, right? I thought I would be what they call a triple threat, someone who is a surgeon, a scientist, and a teacher. And I think mentors that you and I had lived in an era when that was possible. I think now with the pace of advancement and the pace of new knowledge, it's very difficult to be excellent at one of them, let alone two or even three. And if you want to layer onto that the idea of becoming an entrepreneur and understanding the entire business development process, it's daunting. And so
It's a full-time job.
it's a full-time job.
Yeah.
If you really want to be successful,
Sure.
there are other ways to go about it where you may license intellectual property that you have to an OEM or original equipment manufacturer, a company, an orthopedic company, or even a biotech or cell therapy company.
Got it. Now, you brought up a good point there, intellectual property. What is intellectual property? How should we think about it? And when is the right time to try to file a patent or a trademark? How do we navigate that?
Yeah, thank you for that opportunity. A patent is basically a government-listed filing that protects your idea from having other people infringe on your idea. It does not grant you the right to practice what you define in your patent. It just blocks other people from doing what is in your patent. And very often, you may have to get a sublicense from another company because your patent improves on an existing technology. But if the core technology is covered by a patent from someone else, then you may very well need to have a license. Now, the cost to file a patent can be anywhere from, let's say, $50,000 to $100,000 just to file it. But of course, you need to have what's called specific examples and citations to support your idea. So you have to have some evidence. You can't just have some crazy shower idea.
Right? Yeah. You
have
got to have
re-
something behind it.
They call that reducing it to practice.
Okay.
You have to be able to reduce it to practice.
Got it. And so it's not something that, we can go and chat GPT and do and file. You'd recommend really getting with someone with experience, an attorney.
An appropriate patent counsel.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
It's not an easy process, and there's probably a lot of ways to mess it up, I assume.
Yeah. and there are, even when you have a great invention, there are very, very specific ways that you need to write the patent to get claims around what you've invented that prevent other people from practicing what's in your invention. That's the way to think of it. Your invention and your patent has a moat to block other people from coming in.
And do patents expire, or once you have one, it's there?
Also a great question. You hear a lot about this in the pharmaceutical industry, these patent cliffs, statins and other drugs that have typically a 20-year life of the patent from when you file the patent. And then after that, it becomes off patent. And in the setting of drugs, that's how drugs become generic, because they're off patent. And so now any other pharmaceutical company can recreate that molecule and use it in the same way and then charge much, much less for it.
Got it. Are there, people talk about drawing on things on a napkin, right? So you have this idea, you do draw it on a napkin, or you have this way to solve a new problem, like you mentioned. What are kind of like those key first steps, to document that the idea is yours?
Also, really practical question. Use a hardbound book. Use a book of notes, not loose leaf paper, a book of notes. Date your entry. Describe what you are trying to do. Describe the results. And then in a proper laboratory setting, all pages of every laboratory book are co-signed by a witness. So that person is basically substantiating that what you've written down is correct, and it's a third party. You think about the way we all did lab reports when we did organic chemistry. Remember that?
Yeah.
Okay, and you wrote in your lab book and probably had a carbon paper behind it. So you need to have all your lab books bound that way.
And what is the difference between a patent and a trademark?
I thought I told you I wasn't an attorney.
Yeah.
So a patent protects an invention.
Yeah.
A trademark protects a brand
Okay.
or protects an image that is associated with a product. So for example, that little apple that we see on all of our phones and products, that is a trademark.
Got it.
It's a mark that can be used in graphics that signifies that is a product from that company. In fact, you can get trademarks on things that are colors. For example, a yellow of a certain Pantone color, a yellow stretcher and gurney is trademarked by Stryker. So when you see a Stryker, when you see a yellow gurney on your favorite TV show of cops and what have you, everybody knows that that's a Stryker gurney.
Now, are patents, I believe trademarks are licensable. Are patents licensable, or is the patent kind of more just the idea and you always keep that to yourself?
Also, that's the opportunity for the physician to get involved with a company and a physician to make money. So if you had another great idea that you obtained a patent about, you would go to a company, or if I were advising you, I'd tell you to go lots of companies and shop your patent around. Say, I've got this great idea, starting with, here is the problem I'm going to solve. Here is how the invention works. It's for a device or a drug or a biologic or a kit of some sort. They would license the patent from you. In a perfect world, they would pay you an upfront fee to basically reimburse you for all of your sunk costs, and then they would pay you a royalty based on the amount of product that was sold covered by that patent. So a typical royalty-bearing agreement might pay you 6 or 7 or 8% of the total revenue. So there's a very important case of a fellow named Gary Michelson, and Gary had literally hundreds of patents, mostly in the area of spine. He licensed them to Medtronic, right?
Yeah.
And that turned out to be a very difficult court case, because after years of a relationship, he asserted that they were selling products and not paying him the royalty. He won the case and became a billionaire.
Through the case.
Through the case, because the courts deemed that Medtronic, and I'm not trashing them per se, but that it's just an illustrative example. They weren't paying the royalty that he deserved. So these are opportunities to make a lot of money. Mind you, there were hundreds of patents involved.
And it shows you, I guess, the strength of having a patent.
Absolutely.
Right? Now, in that, I assume that if a physician wants to bring in a product, would it be would it have more value not to just have the notebook, but maybe have gotten molds, have actually maybe started some early manufacturing, early testing? Does that give the product more value to then shop it around, or is the idea a lot of times good enough?
That's also a great question. You've done your homework. There's two parts to that. One is, if you have a patent that's issued, then you're probably not going to build the business yourself. You want to license the patent to the company, and that has a certain value, and you will not have had to invest molds, templates, early data. If you're going to go to, and by the way, most companies, when they license your patent, they want to develop the product. If, however, you want to build a company and build prototypes and then start actually getting the necessary regulatory approvals, which is a whole nother gambit that you have to navigate, and begin to sell the product, you can sell your entire business. But that's going to be a much longer, more expensive, and complicated journey, because you've got to navigate all of those vectors of development, as opposed to, I'll say, just getting the patent.
Understood. So again, you got to make that decision a little bit. Do you want to continue to be in clinical practice, and this is a licensing gig, versus, hey, I'm no longer going to practice and I'm going to probably become a business owner, an entrepreneur, and go in that pathway?
Right. And I meet surgeons at meetings like this all around the world every year, and we have these conversations, and I always hear, I can't, I'm pulling my hair out, I can't do both. I can't do everything. And these are tough choices to sometimes have to make.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up because I would say when I just came out of fellowship, I also thought that I would be able to be a clinician and potentially bring a device. And as I've gotten a little older, now the time it's just not existent, right? So you got to make the choice. Now, what would be some of the key milestones, right? If you go from an idea to a prototype, clinical testing, what are there like specific things that you look for?
So a couple things I'd say. One, if you do a Google search and you look at the books that my colleagues and I have written, we talk about that whole product development pathway. I talk about it sometimes as Scott's 16 simple steps to product development.
Yeah.
Individually, none of them are simple. Collectively, all of them are more complicated. But it starts with, and I always say, what is the unmet need? Identify the unmet need. Second major point is get your intellectual property in shape. Third would be demonstrate proof of concept. Mm-hmm. Proof of concept, which may be in an animal study. Then you have to demonstrate that you can scale up your manufacturing. It's not just making 12 for small rabbits in a lab, that you can do this in a way, whether it's hardware or it's plasticware or it's a small molecule or a drug, you have to be able to manufacture it. Then you have your preliminary regulatory permission to proceed into humans, and then your initial clinical data. But once you get into products that require a pre-market approval, a PMA, or a biological license, a BLA, you're talking about $50 to $500 million of investment to get there.
In what kind of time frame I'm sure there's a range, right? But what are we talking about? Or how long number one, does it take to get a patent once you have all your documents in place, and then maybe getting to those other stages?
Yeah, so once you have your idea documented and some evidence to support the reduction to practice, the review and issuance of the patent may take a year. They usually have some office action within 1 year, office action from the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. They have an office action. It sometimes requires revision, like a manuscript.
Yeah.
Right. So call it a year. And then if your product is eligible for a 510K clearance, which is a device that has a predicate, which means there was another product similar to it that had been previously cleared for market, from the time you go into your pivotal animal study till you get your 510K, we tell people it's about 2 to 3 years and probably somewhere between $2 to $4 million of testing. But if you're going to a PMA, which is for medical devices or many combination products, which could be a drug and a device, that is going to be more like 6 or 7 years, depending on the duration of the clinical study. Spine studies usually have a 2-year endpoint. So no matter how much money you throw at it, you can't accelerate time. And biologics or cell therapies and drugs are going to they require more clinical studies. And we tell people it's roughly 7 or 8 years. So it's a long journey.
It's a long journey.
And it's expensive.
Sure.
And it gives you gray hair.
I'm starting to get some of those too, but I haven't even done the device yet. Now, does it matter? Obviously, a lot of the things we're talking about are particular to the U.S. What if, I'm in Europe or I'm in the U.S. and I want to take a product to Europe or, any other continent for that matter? Can I use data or patents from another country and then bring them here? Or do they have to be filed exclusively in the U.S.?
So U.S. market and commercialization is protected by U.S. patents. Okay. And very often, if you're a company, you're going to take the same data that you use to support your patent in the U.S. and file in 20 or 30 other countries.
Okay.
So they're country by country management of intellectual property. And the same is true in an analogous way about market authorization or regulatory approval to be able to sell the product. An approval in the United States, the approval itself doesn't give you permission to market the product in other countries, but the data set that you use to obtain that would be used to apply in other countries for EMEA in Europe, or even in Japan or in China. Those same data sets plus more, sometimes because, for example, in Japan, clinical studies usually have to be performed on patients in Japan.
Okay. So it has to be, I guess there's going to be specifics to each country.
Right.
Okay. So let's say I've chosen to partner with industry. I want to bring my patent or my idea to them. What are some red flags, that you probably should not work with that company, or you should go somewhere else?
Wow. Don't have any conversation about your intellectual property without having a confidentiality agreement in place, a witness in the room taking notes, and in a perfect world, your patent already at least filed. Because we've seen stories where companies take an idea and they just run with it. And they say, hey, I loved having dinner with you. Thank you so much. We'll get back to you if we need you. And 2 years later, you see your idea on the shelf. It
happens.
It happens. Fortunately, not regularly. So your question is, what's a big red flag?
Yeah.
Being asked to share too much.
Too much too early.
Too much too early.
Or if maybe you ask for a non-disclosure agreement and they're unwilling to sign one.
Correct.
That would maybe be a red flag.
Correct. And the other piece is, if they offer you an agreement, like a licensing agreement and a royalty agreement, discuss the agreement with friends or colleagues and an attorney who has already some experience in that space. Because they could offer you an inadequate amount for the potential value of your intellectual property.
What about that specifics to one specific idea? But I know with some industries, they lock you into an agreement where there's these heavy non-competes. Let's say you do have an idea, they don't want to use it, right? But you're kind of locked into this agreement. Are there ways to navigate that where it's like, hey, you're not using my idea, can I take it somewhere else? I believe that may be called a carve out in the contract. What are ways of negotiating these things?
If you've never done it, talk to colleagues and friends who have, and an attorney. It's very often that they will lock you up on an exclusive basis to develop your idea, but you need an exit clause that says something like, if they're not performing to a certain standard, and how you define that certain standard is the squishy gray part. If they're not performing to a certain standard, then you're allowed to take your invention elsewhere. Because the alternative is, hey, if you're not going to develop it, then you can pay me and buy it out to sit on it. We know there are examples of companies who will actually buy another company and then just sit on them so that they're not competitive against what the larger company is doing. They just bury them.
Leverage.
Yeah. When we say sometimes it's never about the money until it's about the money.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Nobody cares about the money until you start making money, right? Yeah. Then all of a sudden, yeah. All right. So let's say I have, I'm going to quit my clinician job. I'm going to run with this. What have been some of the pitfalls or mistakes you've seen entrepreneurs make? Where is it something where they just can't get through to the next step? Do they run out of money? Do they have a hard time with investors? What are some of those pitfalls?
Yes, and yes. One of the things because we talk to a lot of early stage companies, and one of the things that we find enthusiastic entrepreneur, physician, scientists doing is writing papers about their greatest invention and putting things in the discussion that sound speculative, that make it sound like the way you would write an academic paper about the way that it works and all the features and benefits. And then when you go to the FDA and you're trying to have them govern you in the least restrictive way so that you get on the market, they pull up your manuscripts and they say, but Alberto, you said this glows in the dark and cures the heartbreak of psoriasis in your paper right here. And then you have to try and walk that back, which becomes very difficult. So don't overstate your data.
Got it.
Don't be too speculative about. And for that matter, if you decide to take the plunge and become an entrepreneur, and you're not so concerned with academic promotion that you need all these papers, don't write the paper and publish it. Just keep the data and use the data to support your invention. The next place that they stub their toes often is they underestimate the amount of time and money that it's going to take to get to the next stage. And I use this triangle of development that I call good, fast, cheap. Okay?
Yeah.
Pick two.
Good, fast, cheap.
You can only have two.
Okay.
If you want it good and you want it fast, it's not going to be cheap, right? But if you're willing to go cheap and try and do it good, it's not going to be fast.
Got it.
So think through that.
Okay. Have a plan.
Have a plan.
Now, for young entrepreneurs, do you have any advice on how to raise capital? What are some, maybe more not green light ways versus like red light ways to get capital where you can get burned or lose your company because you didn't make the deal right?
Yeah, this is a very difficult space nowadays.
Yeah.
A few things to get started are take advantage of non-dilutive funding that comes in the form of grants, like SBIR funding, Department of Defense funding, NIH funding, DARPA funding, it's the Department of Advanced Research Projects. Mm-hmm. They can offer funding for novel ideas that can ultimately be tens of millions of dollars, and that's non-dilutive, which means that those entities that are funding you don't expect a return on that investment. So when you sell your company, they're not asking for any of that money back. So
it's not a loan.
It's not a loan, it's a grant. And
Okay.
so they do that with the expectation that you will succeed, you will develop a product, and that will help society.
Right.
Okay? Eventually, you don't have to use that, and it's unlikely you could use that to get all the way to market. But if you get $5 million of grant, non-dilutive grant, then you go to venture capital or friends and family or other strategic company sources who've seen, wow, you've actually made a lot of progress for that $5 million. And that's how you show your prototypes. That's how you show your early animal evidence.
And we're getting a little close to the end. We've advanced through the process. When should the entrepreneur start thinking about the exit strategy? So let's say you do make it, right? Should you wait, to make it to have the exit strategy, or should always in the back of your head have, okay, this is how I'm going to exit out of this business?
Yeah, I'm going to give you the answer that I give to most questions I get professionally. It depends.
It depends.
This is my general answer for regulatory. Now, we always have a more detailed answer, but in this scenario, it depends on what your personal goals are. So I have friends who've gotten a 510K and sold $2 or $3 million worth of product to prove that docs will use it, they'll reuse it, the patients are benefiting, and they say, I'm done, okay, I'm going to sell the company for X, pick your number, just throw out on a number and call it $50 million. And then they want to repeat that, and they want to do that again because they like that journey. There are other people who get to that $2 million mark and say, you know what, I want to get this to 20 million and then 100 million. And if you sell that company, obviously it's going to be worth a lot more money, but it's a very different set of skills to get you from the laboratory animals to $2 million of revenue than the skills to get from 2 million to 20 million. And so you have to think about, are you the right guy to do that? Could you still be the chairman of the company and bring in someone who's had commercial experience? These are the hard questions, and we like to help people navigate through that.
That's awesome. And we'll close this part of the segment with, let's say someone has an idea. How do they reach out to you? Is there an application process? I assume you also have to be very picky on who you can choose to work with. What's that process like?
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. My team and I field all comers.
Yep.
So you can find us. You can just search my name on the Google or look up Bruder Consulting. We have a website. You can email me. You can make a submission there. Don't put anything confidential that you don't want me to see.
Right.
I'm not stealing it, but just don't do it. And we'll figure out where you are and whether or not we can help.
Yeah.
Our approach is, I haven't thought about it or expressed it this way before. It's analogous to what your inventor is we want to help people solve their unmet need in their business. Their unmet need may be going from an idea to demonstrating proof of concept, and we'll help them with that. Their unmet need may be going from 2 million to 20 million in revenue.
Right.
So, we serve from concept all the way through commercialization and sale of businesses. The largest business that we've been a part of, is a $500 million transaction.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for that. And certainly, selfishly, every time I have a question, I reach out. So thank you so much for fielding those. We're going to go ahead and move on to another topic, which is the Florida stem cell law. We're going to keep it brief. We don't want to keep you here too long, but it's a hot topic and something that you know a lot about. What is the Florida stem cell law, and kind of how should we navigate that piece?
Yeah, this was a bill that was passed in July. It just became a law in July. And the upshot of it is this allows physicians who treat orthopedic, wound, and pain conditions to use unapproved cell therapies. The bill calls them stem cell therapies, but they're cell therapies in the state of Florida. Okay, so the product does not have to be approved yet by the FDA. So this is creating a huge amount of excitement. My angst about this is it's also creating people who are what I call, and others, bad actors.
Right.
They're going out and they're hanging a shingle, and they think that they can just get away with using unscrupulous tactics. And for patients, I'm very concerned about their safety, because the products have not undergone the rigorous clinical testing. Now, what most people don't understand here is that the requirements to deliver the product in a vial, a cell therapy, for example, is the product still has to be manufactured in a facility that is registered at the FDA and approved to do so.
Okay.
So you can't just have them made in the local lab. You can't have your own little room or in your strip mall clinic where you're culture expanding cells and then delivering them to the patient. That's where people run amok. And so I have a lot of concerns there are some companies that are absolutely taking the legitimate way to do this, but I have some concern that this is going to skive off the rails and create more headaches.
And is that law in action now, where right now it is valid for clinicians to use some of these off-the-shelf products?
Correct. It is.
Okay.
It is legal for physicians to do that. Now, I encourage people to look up the bill. It's available on the web, but you got to read more than the first page, because in the first, I'll say, 10 requirements, you have to have a proper informed consent, and you have to be a licensed physician, and all the stuff that we think of normally.
Yeah.
But it also stipulates that the cells need to be tested for viability before treating the patient. And perhaps the thing that most people are concerned about is there's a very specific requirement that any advertising state that this therapy has not been approved by the FDA, that you should talk to your primary care physician about it, and that the font size of that statement can be no smaller than the largest font used in any of the advertising.
Interesting.
So if your tagline is "get your stem cells here," and then you've got all this small text at the bottom, you have to have in the same font as "get your stem cells here," this is not approved. Talk to your doctor. It's very explicit, and so I'm just waiting to see
if people
cases.
do that.
Yeah, I'm sure they won't. I'm just
Sure,
waiting.
yeah.
I'm sure they won't. I'm just waiting to see who becomes the poster boy for getting in trouble.
For that. Because we have seen a lot of warning letters with these products in other states and before this law was passed, right? This is not something new and something you have a lot of experience about. What are maybe some of the warnings of other physicians in other states trying to use these products? How risky is it?
You could wind up in an orange jumpsuit. It's not fashionable, okay? It is against a federal law to use a product, even if it's manufactured by an FDA-registered site, but to use the product in a way that has not been approved by the FDA. They call that an adulterated and misbranded product. That facility that's manufacturing those cells may in fact be providing those cells to a group of investigators to perform an appropriately regulated clinical trial under an investigational new drug or device authority to be done properly. That's fine. But if you're treating patients under that setting, you can't use extra cells, you can't divert cells and treat patients who are not part of the clinical trial. And we see some of that happening.
So I guess that's an important point, right? If a company comes to you and says, well, we're doing a clinical trial, therefore you can use the product, that is a no-go.
That is
you
a
have
no-go.
to be very much involved and named in the clinical trial.
Correct. You have to be a listed investigator at the FDA, which carries with it all kinds of responsibilities.
Yeah. Now, there's a big difference, I think, between the penalties for a company per se and penalties for physicians, right? Can you guide us a little bit, or just for warning for physicians, right? A company can essentially maybe pay fines, get closed down. Obviously, there may be severe cases if there's fraud or things like that. But for a clinician, the penalty is you're going to lose your license, right? Or you're going to have more implications where you can no longer practice. Am I wrong, or is that an accurate statement?
That's possible. There's a continuum of severity, which starts with a warning. Well, it starts with a phone call, starts with a letter, can be escalated to what's called a warning letter with a capital W from the FDA. It can, if you're practicing out of bounds, let's say, it can lead to state medical board sanctions and removal of your license. It can, which you've worked so long and hard for, you don't want to lose your license. And it can lead ultimately to fines and incarceration. In today's Toby meeting, I'm going to give some examples of a gentleman, and I use that term loosely, who was sentenced to 202 years in jail for using stem cells to treat patients inappropriately.
Yeah, that's it's incredible. Now the other thing, and this is more of maybe a science talk, even with the Florida stem cell law, like you mentioned, not only do the products have to be produced the right way, but my question is, are they any better than some of the autologous products that are available, right? And those are questions that I think you would need to ask your clinician, and it's going to be a case-by-case basis. But how does it compare to the law in Utah? Because I know Utah do they have a similar type of?
So Utah and Montana are also both marching down that pathway to make therapies, particularly cell therapies, available to patients that are not yet federally approved. Okay. But you raise a really interesting point about these kinds of therapies versus autologous point of care. The autologous point of care approach has some benefits, not the least of which is we can all do it today. But when you move to an allogeneic or universal donor, or a donor that creates 1,000 doses of cell, those cells are quality controlled, and exactly, and they have to meet certain release criteria. And so exactly the behavior of those cells and the characterization. My marrow, your marrow, every doc in the audience marrow, they are slightly different. And when we think about things like PRP, my PRP in the morning is different than my PRP in the afternoon. So there's a normal variability, biologically based, that occurs from person to person and even morning to night within the same person. So having something that comes from a central laboratory that's been validated, verified, tested, qualified, you know what it is.
Yeah.
There's an advantage there.
Do you feel, when I started this 12 years ago, orthobiologics were relatively new. There was a lot of skepticism, and to some degree there is, but a lot of our points have been validated by some clinical trials, 10, 12 years later. Does something like the Florida stem cell law, adding bad actors, is that going to kind of bring us back a little bit, right? Where now we have more bad actors playing and maybe just bring back the skepticism, the snake oil salesman type deal?
I think it's a risk, but I don't want to give the impression that all parties involved in treating patients in Florida with stem cells are bad actors.
Fair enough.
They're not all going to be bad actors. I know of some companies that are setting up proper controls and proper processes to make high quality cells available. I think part of the challenge, though, is the clinical data that comes back from those is more than likely going to be, what do we call it? A case series, a personal experience. They're not going to be run like random, they're definitely not randomized controlled clinical trials where you're comparing against a proper control. So pulling really high quality data from the experiences in Florida will be challenging.
Okay. Well, what excites you the most, about orthobiologics in the next 5 to 10 years? Where do you see this field going?
Yeah, well, I've been developing products in orthobiologics since the 80s. So we called it orthobiologics by putting those two words together, biologics and orthopedics. And I had the pleasure of working a bit with Marshall Urist, who back in the day, had this crazy idea. So seeing that come all the way to the market, although I didn't have responsibility for it, was absolutely exciting. When I now look forward in the next 5 years, I define, and our market defines, orthobiologics as more than autologous point of care therapy. It's tissue engineered products, it's biologically manufactured products. And I think the three areas where because we're tracking hundreds of products in development right now, our team internally. The three areas that I think are going to be the most interesting are injectables for managing intervertebral disc degeneration and being able to restore proper disc function and even disc height. So disc. The second is management of focal cartilage defect repair. I mean, we all know Vericel and the Macy technology, but we're seeing a new generation of products to treat focal cartilage defect repair. And the third area are injectable, off-the-shelf treatments for osteoarthritis that could, in fact, be disease modifying.
Got it. That's amazing. Thank you for this time. We're going to close with just two little fun ones. We joked about you being an orthopedic surgeon at the beginning. At a cocktail party, how many people ask you for legal advice because they think that you're an attorney?
Yeah, it's a handful. It depends who's at the party.
Who's at the party?
It's a handful, and I always tell them that my attorney actually tells me it's illegal for me to provide any legal advice.
Yeah, and you've made that very clear pretty much at every one. Also that you're just warning people about how if you're speeding down the highway, a lot of times you're going to be fine, but there's many of you who are going to get the speeding ticket, right? And this is what this is really all about. Lastly, you're so busy all the time. Where do you like to recharge, when you're not working?
Well, I'm blessed with a family. So I love to be with my family, and I love to powder ski.
Nice.
I love to powder ski, jumping out of helicopters and snow cats and being with my guys.
That's amazing. Well, Scott, thank you so much for the time.
Absolutely.
There you folks have it. Scott Bruder.
Thank you, Alberto.
Hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to click to subscribe. And if you like this content, please continue to follow us and certainly reach out to Scott if
Absolutely.
you have any regulatory
Reach out.
questions. Thank
Okay.
you, guys.